Gracious God, may the words that I speak be not my words, but your word. May the words that we hear be your word alone. Amen. It was with some horror that I remembered that it's over 45 years ago now that I went up to university at Durham to study at St Chad's College. And I was interested, one of the first things that I had to learn about the college was the Candlemas Ball. This always took place on the Friday closest to Candlemas, which falls this coming Tuesday, the 2nd of February. But really, the really interesting question I wanted to know was, why was Candlemas and why was it so important? Well, there are a variety of images and suggestions about Candlemas and its origins, and I'll spend some of our time today looking at them. I've surfed the web and done my best research as far as possible. And I want to begin by suggesting to you that it's a pagan festival taken over by the church. And to be honest, many of our Christian festivals we hold so dear have their origins in pagan festivals. It seems quite possible that the holiday of Candlemas should be considered as the beginning of spring. You may see a blanket of snow mantling the earth, or if the snows have gone, you may be sure the days are filled with drizzle, slush and steel grey skies, or bitter frosts as it was this morning. The dreariest weather of the year. In short, the perfect time for a pagan festival of lights. And as for spring, although this may seem to be a tenuous beginning, all the little buds, flowers and leaves are starting to arrive on schedule. In fact, the traditional name for snowdrops, and I've got a good number of those in the manse garden, is Candlemas bells, the beginning of new life. And Candlemas, of course, is the Christianized name for the holiday. The older pagan names talk about Imbolic and Olemic, literally meaning in the belly of the earth or the womb of Mother Earth, hidden from our mundane sight, but with a keener vision. The image of celebration then is one of new birth, the start of something new. So whilst this is a very old pagan image, it's a recognition of the change of the seasons, a realization of the change of the light. At Christmas, the solstice means that people realized we had passed the shortest day. But now, as I already said in my opening to this service, it's beginning to see that there is more light that's visible. Candlemas marks the time when we can really start to see the change. My grandfather used to work as a mechanic, and he used to ride home on a push bike from work. His birthday, which actually falls in the next fortnight, was the first time he could ride home from work without having to put his lights on his bike. So it's the season when that light becomes visible. We may have a long way to go, but here is a change. This version is to be found in the image of Groundhog Day in the US popular tradition, the day when the groundhog comes out of his hole after a long winter's sleep to look for his shadow. And if he sees it, he regards it as an omen of 6 more weeks of bad weather and returns to his hole. If the day is cloudy, hence less shadow, he takes it as a sign of the coming spring and stays above ground. There's no statistical evidence to go with this, but it's interesting. And some of you may be familiar with the film Groundhog Day, which centres on the town of Punxsutawney in Pennsylvania. The tradition, which sometimes includes the bear or a badger, stems from similar beliefs with the arrival of spring, or its lateness, for another 6 weeks, which of course is the next quarter day. So it's most likely a linking of the old pagan customs or quarter day, or the cross quarter day, because that's what it is. It's now retained in our old great weather rhymes. If Candlemas be fair and bright, come winter, have another flight. If Candlemas bring clouds and rain, go winter and not come again. Well, so much for pagan imagery and usage. In one sense, though, it's quite clear. It's these occasions like the winter solstice taken over for Christians. So giving you the background, why should we celebrate? And why is it in our diaries? Well, I want to suggest to you that that is because it is an image of light. The light that shines in the darkness and the light of Jesus in the world. The picture of the light is one that shines up in the darkness, is an example of God's love into the world. We talk then first in the season, the light of Jesus that comes into the world as a light that shines. And unlike winter, which may or may not have ended, will continue to shine in the world. It's about light that has come and will grow. The Catholic Church also calls this feast, calls it the Feast of the Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's fascinating how many of the old feasts are converted into Marian feasts. And the symbol of purification may seem a little obscure, but it has something to do with the old custom of churching women. Even in my ministry, I've been asked to church women after childbirth. Quite interesting. In older customs, of course, it was believed that women were impure for 6 weeks after giving birth. And since Mary gave birth at the winter solstice, she wouldn't be purified until February the 2nd. So counting forwards from December the 25th as day 1, we find that day 40 is February the 2nd. And as a Jewish woman in semi-seclusion for 40 days after giving birth to a son, so it's this time we celebrate the coming of Mary and Joseph with the infant Jesus to the temple at Jerusalem to offer sacrifice, both on behalf of Mary and behalf of Jesus as the firstborn male. The fact that the circumcision and the presentation of Christ in the temple are consecutive verses doesn't ignore the fact that they are separated by some 5 weeks. So this festival, known now as the presentation of the Lord, it's an image of purification that I want to take. Now, I'm not talking about purification of women. Here, like the reading of Malachi, there is a sense more of purifying. The word from Malachi said this, "For he is like a refiner's fire and like fuller's soap." Here can be an image of light, but also of fire. That image that it's fire that purifies. There is one other place where fuller's soap is quoted in the scriptures, and that's at the time of the Transfiguration. Used to make things whiter than white. So this is an image of purification, of cleansing, of putting things right. This is a time of year of season for cleansing. My local supermarket seems to stick on the end aisles. You know, they always try and sell you things at the end of an aisle when you slow down to turn around. That's why they put things there. It's all a con, really, to try and make us buy those things. That's where all the cleaning projects have appeared. If you want to stop up on cleaning products cheaply, now's the time to buy. And the sunlight, when it does come through my windows, reminds me I need to clean the insides. Is it too much to link that with an image of purifying? As we get to this season of the year and the winter begins to lose its grip, then thoughts to cleaning and getting ready for the year ahead are quite clearly with us. But purification means much more than cleaning things. Purification means a looking at life. It means that looking at those areas of life that are important. And in that Malachi reading, it's about justice against those who oppress and use their power unfairly. Purification, too, of our own lives, to remove those things that mean that we have behaved badly or unfairly. If we bring the light upon our lives, they will show up all our inadequacies and failures. If this season in its first image is one that speaks of the light that comes into the world, then the second speaks of injustice and oppression. This can be used at any moment in the life of the world, but it is rarely there where we see violence around us in so many places, and so much suffering, and unfair suffering, where the poorest face up to so much more, where we're finding themselves facing the pandemic. So Candlemas speaks about light. It speaks about purification, but it also speaks about the proclamation of the gospel. In the Anglican Church, the festival called the Presentation of Christ in the Temple is a reference to Jesus meeting in the temple with the aged Simeon and Anna. In the East, it's primarily a festival of Christ, and in the West, it had become something of the Virgin Mary calendar. And this festival is seen in different views according to the custom you wish to use. There is a sense of Mary being purified, of the presentation in the temple, and the meeting with Simeon, which is the meeting of the old and the new covenant together. And it's here for me that we have this significance. The imagery of the link of the old covenant under Abraham and the new covenant in Jesus that is met in this passage. Look at the old. References to the law abound within this. Circumcision taking place on the 8th day, the action that brought the male child into the part of God's people under the Abrahamic covenant. The visit to the temple some 33 days later, tied to the imagery under the Mosaic covenant, fulfilling all these requirements. And we see that the Holy Family are fulfilling the requirements of the law. And it's in the temple that the child Jesus, that they meet Simeon and Anna. Simeon standing in the tradition of the law, doing what was required for the offering of sacrifices. And Anna standing in the tradition of the prophets, calling people forward and offering them challenges. And the key line for me in both these people is the fact that Simeon speaks of Jesus being a light to the nations. Where else would we find this imagery that speaks of Jesus not only in the covenant of Israel, but breaking the bonds and bringing in a new covenant? And for me, Luke is making a very clear point. Jesus, coming from the faithful tradition of Abraham and Moses and the prophets, goes on to be the covenant for all people. But Simeon finishes with some disturbing words. This marvelous salvation through Jesus has a dark side. Not everyone will take kindly to Jesus. There will be a falling as well as a rising in many in Israel. Jesus will be a sign that will be spoken against. He will cause a crisis. Decisions will be made for him or against him. The sword of Jesus will divide, discriminate, and judge the thoughts, attitudes, and relationships of people. Mary, the mother of Jesus, will go through that same crisis. And everyone must decide to do and to work out what effect Jesus will have on their lives. Simeon recognized something special in Jesus, and he knew that he'd seen the Lord's Christ, and that young or old he could depart in peace, for the eyes of faith had seen God's salvation. Perhaps not the salvation he was expecting, the vindication of a particular people, but something bigger, the salvation which God had prepared for all people, which is something you and I can also separate, can also be part of. The offering of himself upon the cross is the fulfillment of that imagery, the pain and the suffering that brings in a new covenant. And it's this sense of meeting that is found in Simeon as he recognized that this Jesus is not just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles as well. And the Greek church has a great understanding when it speaks of meeting the old and the new in Jesus. So Candlemas should not be seen as some optional extra, but an integrated festival of the Christmas cycle. It's the natural climax after 40 days of the Christmas and Epiphany season. And many people, Indeed, some across this district have not taken down their crib scene until Tuesday, when Candlemas brings that season to an end. This feast is rich in meaning with many related themes: presentation, purification, meeting, light for the world. The very fact of the different names shows just how much it has to teach us. Yet we, on the whole, let this festival pass us by. I, brought up as a young Methodist on the banks of the River Severn, went to university and found something that was totally different that I'd never even heard of. I believe we should be taking more seriously some of these older festivals, which we ignore them, and make them a greater importance for the faith. For the festivals of Christmas and Easter, well, they've been hijacked, haven't they? Some would say they have reclaimed their pagan roots. But this one that speaks of the light of Christ and the need to purify hearts and minds and action and commitment, is something we as Christian people should be involved with and celebrate with joy. I set out to inform you today. I hope I've done an awful lot more than that. I hope that with the image of purity and commitment, and to share the light with others, is a challenge for us all. And whilst we might be looking at those products in the supermarket for a good spring clean, do we come with clean hearts into the service of God? One of the hymns I'd chosen for today is one that we couldn't manage to find the music for and everything else. So I wanted to choose to read it at the end of my sermon before we sang the next hymn. It is in Singing the Faith. It's number 229, this hymn, if you want to at some stage look at it and read it yourself. It was written by a friend of mine, Andrew Pratt. I trained with Andrew when we were back in Ministerial Training College, and Andrew has written many a hymn. But let me read this to you. Mary and Joseph came to the temple, brought the boy Jesus, offered him there. People were waiting, wanting to greet him. Long had they sought him, solace for care. Anna had prayed there, widowed, long waiting, worshipping God by day and by night. Now she is praising, filled with elation. Here is God's promise. Christ is her light. Simeon sings now. God offers blessing, brilliantly gilding dawn of his day. Light in the darkness, never extinguished. Light of all nations, light up our way. So I'll turn to listen to some music and to sing as we're muted.